You are listening to the Enormocast.
You know, it'd be great if we could all climb free and naked as wee little spider monkeys, leaping and bounding up rocks with nothing but our birthday suits and belief. But we can't, can we? At least not in mixed company. So when it's time to gear up and protect your sensitive bits on the next adventure, please consider that Black Diamond Equipment has been supporting the Enormocast for 6 years, nearly from its inception. BD had faith in the project as soon as they got wind of its enormous stature, and they've been helping melt the cheese on the delicious ear burger that is the Enormocast ever since. So please consider that next time you open your wallet for a spanky new piece of gear. Black Diamond, proud sponsor of the Enormocast. La Sportiva presents Story Time. There once was a little boy named Tommy Caldwell. One day, little Tommy decided he wanted to climb a really big wall, but he couldn't find any shoes to climb the big wall in. So he decided to build his own out of Scotch tape, fluffernutter, and a used pair of hand jammies left behind by a couple of Euros in Camp 4. When those didn't work, Tommy called the adults at Sportiva and asked them for help. Sportiva came up with the TC Pro, named after little Tommy himself. A shoe so good at big wall climbing that little TC grew up to climb the hardest, biggest big walls in the world in his TC Pros. Then he talked his best friend, teeny tiny Alex H, into trying them, and Alex, well, he became a pretty good climber too. So if you want to be like TC or Tiny A, go to Sportiva.com or your favorite mountain shop and check out a pair of TC Pros, and maybe someday you'll grow up too. The end.
We gotta get
Listen, where you playing in town? You playing here?
We're doing the Enormo Dome, whatever it is. It's terrific.
Oh,
It's
yeah,
big
big
house. We
place
sold
that
it out.
side of town. That's a
Very
big
nice.
place. You sold
What's
it
that,
out.
20,000 seats?
We really should run.
Look, you better get up there before you panic. Those pens are loose. You're very good. I have really enjoyed climbing with you. We'll make it. I don't think so. But we shall continue with style. Bad weather. No, later, anytime.
Today's show is brought to you by Black Diamond Equipment, with support from Maxim Ropes.
And the fine folks at La Sportiva. And don't forget our charter sponsor, Bonfire Coffee. Go to bonfirecoffee.com and enter Enormo at checkout for a discount on great coffee and to support the Enormocast.
And now back to the show.
Hello and welcome to the Enormocast. This is your host, Chris Kalous. It is January 24th, 2018, about 9 o'clock in the evening here in Colorado. And this is episode 144 of the Enormocast, a conversation with ice climber, mixed climber, alpinist, Raphael Slawinski. A lot of you guys probably have never heard of Raphael Slawinski. He kind of likes it that way. But yeah, Raph, as his friends call him, coming out of Calgary, one of the preeminent ice climbers of the last 20, 25 years up there, as well as a big mountain climber, climbing in Pakistan, climbing in the Canadian Rockies. And though his name is not necessarily household, he's one of those guys that ice climbers and alpinists know and revere. It was pretty cool. I was down at the Ice Fest as usual, not climbing ice, didn't even climb a pitch of ice this year. We had trouble getting gear because we were kind of late to the party one day, and, one thing led to another, and we were back in the hot tub. But we did enjoy ourselves down there, and ran into Colin Powick, who was good friends with Raphael Slawinski, and I saw that he was on the program, and I said to Colin, you have to get me Raphael Slawinski. And boom, pow, a few hours later, we were sitting down. Literally happened as quickly as that, which was really cool because Raph lives up in Calgary, and that's a long ways away from Carbondale. So as you know, I stalked these people trying to get them in front of me, and it just worked out really well. Very interesting guy, a physics professor, but he spends every other waking hour that he's not hanging out with his wife and his hairless cats, he's in the mountains climbing. Anyway, very cool interview from a thoughtful guy. And we'll get to that in just a second. The only news I have is actually that I'm going to be at the American Alpine Club event in February in Boston. Yeah, I'm going all the way to Boston for that. The American Alpine Club very generously invited me to come out there, get some interviews, and we'll be doing those on site with some of the greats that are going to be there. But I'm also going to do a little Northeast tour. Yeah, I'm finally not going to ignore the Northeast completely. I'm going to go up there, going to ferret out some interviews. It's kind of its own scene up there. It's like some people are kind of trapped in amber, I feel like, up there. We don't know what goes on up in the Northeast out here in the West. Just cold mountains and old school rock climbing, I guess. If you have suggestions or can put me in touch with somebody you want to hear on the show, yeah, feel free to email me at chris@enormocast.com. And as soon as I'm done with all the hate mail from last episode, I will get to it. I will get back to you as soon as I can. Hell hath no fury, like a daisy chain wearer scorned. Anyway, that's the American Alpine Club benefit dinner. I'll be up there. If you're going, love to chat with you. If you're not going and want to go, you can go check it out at americanalpineclub.org on the benefit dinner link. Yes, the Enormocast in a tuxedo. Okay, let's get to this one. Raphael Slawinski. Well, let's go ahead and just jump in and see what happens.
Yeah.
My kind of first question for you, my very first question for you is whether or not I'm still a legend in Canmore at all. Is that still happening at all? Is there any talk of me up there anymore?
Well, for one thing, I don't live in Canmore. I live in Calgary, so it may not seem like much of a difference, but it means I'm not in the scene.
How about Calgary? Does anyone in Calouse still come up?
I mean, your name's in the guidebook. Your name's in the guidebook and all those cool multi-pitch routes in the Ghost. So I think your name is there for posterity.
Okay, good. All right. Well, at least that's happening. I just wanted to see what was going on.
Yeah. You're gone but not forgotten.
Okay. I appreciate that. That's important to me to still have a legacy up there.
Oh, yeah. And, well, the legacy is the rock in Devil's Gap.
Right. Cool. Yeah. Still wondering why that place just hasn't blown up even more with rock climbing. There's so much left.
Yeah.
There's so much left.
I mean, there's so much left in the range. Yeah. And, I mean, some ways people go to the easy to get to places like, for example, let's take single pitch, let's take Raphael. I mean, people are squeezing in yet another variation at Raphael when there's all of Echo Canyon. And then people are squeezing another variation like Echo Canyon when there's other stuff. So, we won't run a rock anytime soon.
Yeah, for sure. Talking about your history, about when was the dawn of your climbing in the Canadian Rockies?
So I had a pretty slow start to climbing. I kind of started meandering around the mountains and doing a bit of glacier travel and stuff like that in the late 80s, and then got into some easy mountaineering in the early 90s, but it really didn't grab me at first. And strangely enough, it was actually going away to grad school in Chicago, of all places, in the middle of the Midwest. Thousands of kilometers of cornfields between me and the nearest mountains. It was living there that kind of got me psyched on climbing, because all of a sudden I realized that I missed the mountains. I think until you're deprived of something, you don't know how much it means to you.
Right. What years were you there?
I was there 89 to 94.
Okay. Cool. So how did then, let's go there. Like where are you going? University of Chicago? Okay. So you are well into downtown Chicago at that point. I mean, South Side a little bit.
South Side, exactly.
Yeah. So how is it that suddenly you find climbing there in 89 and 94, which coincidentally I graduated high school in Libertyville, Illinois, north suburb of there, in 1989, and I left for Colorado in 1989. So here you are, how is it you find climbing in a place like that, in that situation? Then?
Well, like I said, I'd been doing some moderate mountaineering back in the Rockies, back home, and then all of a sudden I find myself in Chicago, and I realized, holy shit, I was actually really into this stuff. And so I started looking for the nearest thing, and obviously no mountains. So I find places like Devil's Lake, and my first 5-6 top rope was at Devil's Lake. And I find places like Starved Rock, this little state park 2 hours west of Chicago. And my first leads and my first top ropes, my first leads, sort of grade 3-4 happened at Starved Rock. So yeah, I was just looking for something that had some verticality.
Right now, my Chicago listeners are like cheering that Rapheal Slawinski started ice climbing at Starved Rock. They're super stoked right now, I can guarantee it.
I think I got lucky too that for a couple of winters there, I was actually cold enough that some ice formed. I understand that it's, especially these days, it doesn't come in every year. So, so yeah, I was definitely fortunate.
I just saw pictures 2 days ago, I think, on one of the feeds that there's ice in Starved Rock right now.
I'm psyched
because it's been like ungodly cold there.
Cool.
You know, in the last few
I'm
months.
psyched for all the Chicago climbers.
Yeah, awesome. Did you venture up? I mean, finding stuff in Michigan, all those sorts of places.
So
as well?
just towards the end of my stay in Chicago, I drove up, made a little road trip to the Upper Peninsula, and I still remember walking over the ice to Grand Island off of the coast there, after driving for 8 hours from Chicago. So we get there, it's already dark. So we walk under the northern lights onto the island, and for a few days we just camped and climbed there. And so actually, ever since, I've been going back to the Michigan Ice Fest.
Oh, right on.
And so actually, this winter, I'm going there again for my 3rd or 4th time. And I feel a special connection with the place. And kind of my, even though I was at home, those are my early stomping grounds.
Mm-hmm. For sure. And who did you find to climb with?
Well, so there are actually quite a few people. There are a few people, fellow graduate students, who are also hungry for anything vertical. And so actually with a few of them, we developed some bouldering on the south side, this retaining wall of a harbor on the south side. And we actually, one of the guys, Jeff Elam, put together a little guidebook to the place. And it was a funny place. There'd be people hanging out at the top of this wall, just drinking beer. So occasionally these bottles would fly over the wall. So the first thing when we got there, you'd have to sort of clear the broken glass. And then you pop over the top of the wall and someone looks at you and is like, you could have walked around the backside.
Right, of course, yeah. And these are made out of rock, or are you guys gluing rocks to them? Or
no, so this
cracks
was,
or what?
So this was sort of the stone wall with mortar in between the stones. Okay. And so to warm up, we do traverses just kind of on the edges of the stones. And then for all the hard problems, we're crimping just the features on the stone. So I'm not sure. I bet there's some problems that we'll be able to do now.
Right.
Because I don't like crimping that much. I prefer other kinds of climbing. So I bet there was some stuff there that was actually kind of hard.
Right. Cool. So then you go back to Canmore?
Or to Calgary, yeah.
Or to sorry, yeah. I keep saying Canmore. You go back to Calgary, and tell me about what your vision now is when you're looking around the mountains. You obviously changed quite a bit in 4 years, what you were interested in doing, hiking versus climbing versus whatever.
Yeah, so when I got back, it was like I could not get enough of the mountains. Much to my wife's chagrin. I think I really tried her patience those first few years back because after, again, being deprived of the mountains, I just spent basically every free moment running around and doing routes on Yam and ice climbing. And of course, my first season ice climbing, basically I hadn't done anything in the range. And so at that point I was sort of leading sort of grade 4, just breaking into grade 5. And so all these routes that I had read about and dreamed about, and now I could actually go up and do them. So it was a very exciting time. It was a kind of a scary time too, because as I'm sure you know, there's inexperience and keenness are a dangerous combination. And every 6 months or so, at a fairly regular intervals, I would have these close calls, which and sometimes close calls are just a matter of bad luck, but there was a lot of bad judgment involved here.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. So, for example, there was one. So this was when I was also getting into some alpine climbing and some alpine mixed climbing. There's this fairly small route in the Columbia ice fields called Shooting Gallery on Mount Andromeda, and I went up to do that, and it was a really warm September day, and the crux is this little strip of ice. And I started up at the belay was 10 or 20 meters below, and off from some pitons off on the sidewall, and I'm just basically hooking rock under slush. There's just it's not even ice; it's above freezing, and if I had any brains, I would have just backed off. But it wasn't even boldness; it was just sheer stupidity. It just didn't occur to me to back off. I just kept climbing and not getting any gear in, and until finally my tools sheared through the slush, and I fell off, and I took this giant factor 2 fall onto the belay, trying to self-arrest inadvertently with my teeth. I actually lost a couple of teeth in the process. So stupid shit like that.
Right. Just like, not even making a mistake per se, but just not
clueless.
Knowing. Yeah, just clueless. Right. Right.
Just not knowing any better.
How old were you at this point?
I was old enough that I should have known better.
Old enough to know.
I was kind of
just curious, like when it got into your life.
Well, I was kind of a late bloomer. I really didn't get seriously into climbing until sort of my early or even mid 20s. Okay. And so by then we're talking late 20s. So I'm not some apologies to all the kids out there, but I'm not some 17-year-old. I should have known better.
You're just too amped up.
Exactly.
Okay. There's an arc here because I think that having been someone who started ice climbing actually right in that same zone, because when I moved to Colorado in 1989, that's when I started climbing and got right into ice climbing as well. And it obviously looks really different than what it looks like today. And I didn't make it. My sort of interest in it waned a little bit before. There seems to have been, like in the late 90s, another revolution in the gear in terms of curve tools, even, more swooped picks, boots and gear and everything else getting much lighter, and it was much less of this like just straight in bashing. And it occurs to me that your career since then is like passed through that entire arc of what was, I think, kind of another revolution in ice climbing since the one that like Chenard started with the reverse curve picks and climbing steep ice. So let's talk a little bit about that, like the differences between these moments when you started in those years in the mid 90s, crossing the threshold to this crazy mixed climbing. What were some of the kind of benchmarks for you as you moved through that history? Yeah,
so it's interesting you mentioned that we probably started ice climbing at the same time, and you went more the rock climbing way, whereas certainly more and more actually each passing year I love rock climbing, but also obviously I got in a big way into ice and mixed and alpine, and I think partly it was because I found that I had a certain facility for it, and I think we liked things we're good at, and I found that I got good at ice climbing, relatively speaking, a lot quicker than at rock climbing, and so I think that drove me forward. And like you said, it was a really cool time to be in ice climbing because ice climbing was changing pretty fast. I think I was lucky that I got in at the very, very tail end of the straight shafted Stubai and
foot fangs
and. Although I wore my first crampons not my first crampons, but my mainstay for quite a number of years actually were foot fangs. So I definitely
you caught that end of that.
I caught that end of that, but already I used halfway decent screws as opposed to I caught the very tail end of the snark era.
I had a whole rack of snarks.
I might have given up on ice climbing if I'd been in your position. Gear is important, but I would also not overestimate the importance of gear because, yes, ice climbing has changed, and we, especially, with lighter gear and way more efficient ice screws, that makes a huge difference. And warmer boots and better clothing, we can move way faster and be more free on ice. But in the end, some of the stuff that people were doing back then was really high end also. So I don't want to. Well, again, gear is important, but I think people's attitudes and people's psyche in the end matter just as much, if not more.
Yeah, so let's talk about that then, like, because you're right, the gear becomes sort of a foundation, but then there still has to be this vision on top of it to decide that, again, in that era, 89, 94, like a mixed climb, because I climbed all mixed up in the park, some of these Duncan Ferguson routes in Rocky National Park and stuff. And he was sort of a cutting edge, sort of mixed climber. But it meant that you were like on ice mostly, and you move every once in a while. You're scraping at something with your on the rock with your tool for a minute or whatever. But what happened after that, and what happened in your era, and was happening, I think, really strongly where you guys was this idea of, okay, these mixed climbs can be mostly rock. We're in an era now where they're all rock even.
Sure.
But talk about maybe the movement towards that, because you were a big part of that.
I think it started in the early 90s with people wanting to get onto piece of ice that never seemed to form to the ground.
Sure.
So things like Suffer Machine and so on, where they would... And there the emphasis was on just getting to the ice any which way, and then it was all about the ice climbing. The rock was just a means to an end. And then somehow the rock became maybe not an end in itself, at least not initially, but it became important also how you climb the rock. So, I mean, dry tooling to some extent is glorified aid climbing. You're obviously not grabbing the rock directly. You have basically you're sort of holding ice hooks in your hand, or sky hooks in your hands, but still, it's, especially when it gets steep, it gets pretty damn physical, and so it became important that to do those things free in the sense in which we understand free climbing, mixed climbing, and so by the late 90s, especially, a lot of these big bolted mixed routes were going up, like the real Big Drip and Rocket Man, and I had some hand in, especially in Rocket Man, where yeah, it was just as much about the ice, I think, as it was about these cool athletic pitches between the ice. And then I guess, as happens quite often when a new sport develops, it begins to specialize and becomes a thing in its own right, becomes sort of art for art's sake. And so this mixed climbing, this dry tooling, started coming down to these overhanging cliffs and caves, and there the ice might have just been this little 2-meter goatee at the end of it, just this mere excuse, and really it became all about the intensely technical and physical moves from the deck to get to the ice, and basically you were done when you got to the ice. And to some extent culminated with routes that Will Gadd put up, like Musashi, where it was all about the big roofs getting to the ice, and basically once you got to the ice, you were done.
And during that era, how drawn were you to that versus being drawn to things in the mountains, big routes, big faces? So where was your energies going in that kind of era?
I kept going into the mountains. So, yeah, for example, in 99, did the Ace Train for the first time, and I think 2001 climbing the north face of Geeky. So I was still into mountain routes, but I would maybe do 1 or 2 bigger mountain routes a year, and really my energy was largely focused, especially in the winter months. I was never perverse enough to dry tool in the summer. That's just wrong. Sorry to the dry toolers out there, but there's better things to do in the summer.
Right.
But yeah, for a number of years there, my energy in the winter was definitely focused on initially figure fours and then the heel spurs and whatnot. And it was kind of fun too that, again, for a while there with some friends like Ben Firth, we felt like we were on the cutting edge of our sport, and it helps to choose a really small, obscure sport. It helps you be on the cutting edge. Right. Exactly. Yeah. So we were doing things at places like the Gulag, this obscure cold cave on the way up to the Terminator, where I think at the time one of the routes we did there, Animal Farm, was one of the hardest things in North America, and it was obviously, we all have egos, and it was kind of fun to think that we're doing something that was harder than anyone on this continent has done, maybe. So for a number of years, my focus was definitely on that kind of climbing, and again, what was also exciting around the time was that, for one, we're pushing grades. All of a sudden, we're like going from M8 to M9 to M10 to M11 in really quick succession. And also the gear too, that I think in 99, I was still doing those routes, doing figure fours, hanging on leashes and big boots, big crampons. And 2 years later or so, it was about the heel spurs. And then became clear that with heel spurs, you could climb anything, because once you learn how to use them, you could hang out anywhere. So basically, the sport kind of lost its point. Once something becomes too easy, it's just not interesting anymore. And so we took away the heel spurs, and so the sport became interesting again. And I mean, just like these days, people are taking away the figure fours to make it a little less mechanical, a bit more like rock climbing. So it was really fun to be part of the scene, and to kind of play a bit of a role in that whole advance, as this little niche sport of dry tooling was really coming of age and getting revolutionized.
So I don't want to get too in the weeds here, because I want to get into your personal, climbing a lot more. But I wanted to ask actually really quick, because the heel spur thing is, as a non-ice climber and someone who doesn't mix climb, and maybe people have no idea that there was this like moment where those were sort of out of fashion or removed. And now you're saying that the figure four is sort of being sort of looked down upon as like something. Well, but all I'm asking is like, how does that, can you talk about how that sort of coalesces in the sport to where I guess everybody sort of gets on board with this idea that, stylistically, like those are out, this is out. Is it just kind of a meme setup where it percolates and everybody finally agrees?
I think so. And the comparison I would use is, think of places like the Millennium Cave in Maple, that maybe someone who's really, really good at knee barring can or rifle, can kind of knee bar their way up a route without getting pumped. And at that point, it kind of, at least for someone who is that skilled at that technique, it loses its interest. And so what do? Well, you take away the knee pads and you take away the knee bars, and all of a sudden you get pumped again. Right. And so basically it was like that. You take away the heel spurs and you get pumped again. And it was, for me, it actually was crystallized on one particular day. So and I forget, it was like 2002, 2003. And on that day, I was climbing in the Cineplex Cave, this big cave on the Icefields Parkway, and I beta flashed a route, I forget if it's M11 or M12, and I'm not that good a climber to be flashing stuff like that, but basically I just kind of heel spurred my way up it. I would kind of hang on a heel spur while the first ascensionist would feed me beta, and I would make a few more moves, hang on a heel spur, listen to more beta. And later in the day, I got on Musashi, which I had done before, and halfway up the route, I dropped a tool. And so instead of taking, I just hung on a heel spur, lowered a loop of rope, and pulled the tool back up and continued. Okay. And that really crystallized to me that this is getting silly.
So you're literally like hanging upside down.
You're hanging upside down, but if you have tight fruit boots, these boots with bolted on crampons, and if they're tight enough so they don't peel off don't exactly, you can fully relax.
Right, you're just hanging off of a bone and
you're not you're hanging off of bone. You're not hanging off a muscle. You can be there forever. Okay, until your belayer gets bored.
And didn't Ben pull some stunt where he threw a chair up in the middle of a route?
That's right.
Prove a point about like chilling out in the middle of a route.
That's right. Yeah, and so then it kind of led to this whole. I think Will Gadd calls it bareback climbing, where so you're not allowed heel spurs, and neither are you allowed, say, to hook a leg over a tool, because again, if you had a good enough tool placement, you could hook a leg over that, and again, it's kind of like a perfect knee bar. You can rest almost forever.
All right. So you're just, I mean, it's just sort of style is what you guys are talking about.
Yeah. It's style. I mean, ultimately those sports we do are interesting if there's kind of just the right balance between possibility and challenge.
Sure.
If something's impossible, then it's not interesting. But if there's no challenge, it's not interesting either. It has to be kind of just at the limit of possibility, and then it's interesting.
And you guys feel like, or do you feel personally that it worked itself out to that balance kind of in its current form?
These days, I don't do that much dry tooling. I mean, I still go out and dry tool. I have my own crag that I've been developing that I use as a kind of as a personal gym, just to kind of keep a certain level of fitness. But I certainly don't. It's been quite a number of years since I pushed the grades, so I'm out of touch with what's going on at the cutting edge. I do know that what's going on partly at the cutting edge is business of, so does the French especially, and Jeff Mercier is a big proponent of climbing without figure fours, and I can kind of see his point, because again, figure fours are a very mechanical form of climbing. You're basically repeating the same move for 30 or 40 meters. It's not terribly interesting for the climber. It's even less interesting for someone watching it. Whereas if you disallow a figure four, just, again, a silly game we play.
Sure.
But all of a sudden you tell yourself, okay, I'm going to do this without figure fours. Well, all of a sudden now you have to keep some core tension and find little divots for your feet. And again, it becomes a bit more like rock climbing.
So about kind of back to your personal, you're going back to this like chronological part of this thing. You got back to Calgary, went through a good period of death-defying naivete, if you will, in the mountains.
That's a good way of describing
it. And then, and then found yourself, okay, one of the guys in the scene, creating the style, creating the climbs, putting up climbs, all these sorts of things. You said for a couple of years you were driving your wife crazy because every minute needed to be in the mountains, but it doesn't sound like that changed so much.
Yeah.
So what did your life, I mean, what did your life look like around climbing, so to speak? What else were you up to? I know you're a professor. You're married. Describe your obsession with one thing versus the necessities.
Yeah,
of,
well,
of,
my wife might say that that things haven't changed that much since those days, because I still so occasionally I whine about just being a weekend warrior, and she just tells me, "Give me a break, you're not a weekend warrior." So I still get out a bunch. So like you said, I am a physics professor at Mount Royal University in Calgary, and actually I really like what I do. It's a smaller undergraduate teaching university, so the focus is primarily on teaching rather than research, and I really enjoy that. I don't spend my time writing grants. I spend my time mostly with students, and I'm not sure if they're always psyched about it, but most of the time I quite enjoy the process. And the nice thing about academia is that there are periods when it's go, and then periods when it's slack. And I definitely take advantage of those and get out a lot locally. So again, it helps to live in Calgary on the doorstep of the Canadian Rockies, that I can do even some quite big routes on the Icefields Parkway, either leaving the night before and getting back late the following evening, or even just doing big day trips. And certainly for rock climbing or just casual days on ice, it's super easy to do. Even occasionally, if I have classes in the morning, I'll pack my gear, and the days are long enough, I'll just zoom out in the afternoon and get in some pitches on ice or in rock. And of course there are the summers too, and so again, somewhat to my wife's chagrin, I developed a bit of a passion for expedition climbing starting a dozen years ago or so. So I've made a bunch of trips to Alaska and quite a few trips to Asia as well, so mostly Pakistan.
Let's talk a little bit about the Canadian Rockies climbing and how you sort of perceive it. Obviously, you fell in love with it, and in some ways, in talking to your friends, and I know some folks that climb with you, and I did, that was sort of my research, was just kind of like trying to get some impressions. In a lot of ways, I get this impression that you found a calling that might have been sort of accidental, but I feel like the way you talk about it, the way your friends talk about how you climb, that something in you really feels like it was meant to do this type of climbing. You know, our friend Colin Powick talks just about how good you are at climbing on choss and on, you know, these big routes in the mountains, and not everybody's good at that stuff, and not everybody enjoys it. And you know, when we talk about choss, that's a negative. Sure. It's a negative word, but it appears as though that's something that you're really drawn to. So, you know, what is it about the Canadian Rockies, you think, that, and about you, that sort of found this nexus together to where, you know, these things that I would look at and think of as a horror show, you look at and you think, like, I want to go climb that thing?
I think you were right to talk about enjoyment, and that a lot of people don't enjoy that. And certainly on a big climb, there's typically, you know, there are some moments when you're not enjoying yourself, and you wish that you were done and back down on the trail and ideally back home in bed. So actually, just a couple of weeks ago, I did a bigger climb along the Ice Hills Parkway where we're on the go for 23 hours. And I remember kind of being somewhere up there on the summit ridge sometime after midnight, kind of thinking, I could be home in bed, and why am I doing this? But there is...
Yeah, you're like, smiling right now talking about it. So.
Like you said, there's... I think ultimately there has to be enjoyment there. If there isn't enjoyment on some level, you won't stick with it. You will try it once or twice, but you won't do it. Whereas, again, these days I may spend more time clipping bolts and trying to red point stuff at Echo Canyon than I used to, and maybe I'm a little more choosy about the big chossy routes I do. But at the same time, it's still something that that draws me and that gives me a huge amount of satisfaction and ultimately quite a bit of enjoyment too, because it's this... I'm not even sure what it is. And I like to say that the day when I'll truly need to articulate a reason for why I do it is that the day I'm done.
Oh, right. So let the Enormocast ruin your climbing career right now.
No, but
I'm going to make you say it out loud, and then you'll be like, God, he's right. I shouldn't be doing this.
No,
this is stupid.
I've given a number of slideshows over the years, and again, I sort of asked the same questions. Like, you do those things which, in the moment, there is quite a bit of suffering involved, and oftentimes beforehand, when I have the butterflies before a big climb, it's not even so much that I'm afraid of the climbing. I'm just afraid of, or kind of dreading the huge effort that I know it'll take, and that by the end of it, I'll be absolutely wrecked. And especially when you think about it in advance, I don't think you can think too far in advance, and you have to kind of enjoy the moment and enjoy the little bits. And yeah, at times you're miserable, but then all of a sudden you have these flashes that yeah, here I am stumbling around and biting wind on the summit ridge of Mount Wilson at 2 o'clock in the morning, but I'm with a good friend and we're kind of laughing about it, and we still have a long descent ahead of us. But in the end, we're doing what we really want to be doing. I know this, again, and being a physicist, I always tell my students, be precise. This is too sort of a fairly common comment on when I'm grading assignments is, this is too vague. Be more precise. And I'm painfully aware that I'm being very vague and not precise enough. Mm-hmm. But I think in the end it comes down to the fact that there is something about this kind of climbing. So those big alpine routes in the Rockies that I find sort of being on some big north face where you're kind of looking around and you just see all the shattered limestone around you, but at the same time you're in this huge dark cathedral. There's something about that's those are just incredible places to be. And I think it, again, like I was saying earlier about ice climbing, that I think it helps that it's the kind of climbing that for some reason I seem to be good at. And I don't know what it is. I don't consider myself an especially bold climber. For example, I don't go in for soloing very much, but yet I seem to be able to somehow keep it together on these pitches, or these sort of thinly iced pitches of decomposing rock.
I think there's a lot of people who know you and even folks who just know of your resume, as it were, that would find it pretty comical that you just said you don't consider yourself much of a bold climber. I mean, because I just associate those climbs having. I jokingly started this with trying to figure out if I still am appreciated in the area, and I climbed on a different medium mostly, but I did Mount Babel and did some of these other things and got to feel like a little taster of that kind of rock and that kind of alpine setting, and it's a serious business up there. I feel like no matter what, we're it's like good rock up there is not like Yosemite granite. And so the bad rock up there is pretty wild.
That's right. Yeah, no. So, and having done the east face of Babel, you know what bad rock can be like, and especially on that face, you're having to pull some reasonably hard moves on mud, on not so
tower
good
things and stuff. Yeah.
I think a lot of it too is I think what I quite enjoy as well is retaining control in these environments that are just so big and in some ways so uncontrolled. And I think we fool ourselves if we think we're always in full control. I think that's how we get hurt. And I think sometimes when we always look for reasons for accidents, that this or that, someone made this or that mistake. But I think if you go out on these big uncontrolled environments, you are relinquishing some measure of control. And so sometimes bad things happen just because you got unlucky. But I think part of the big part of my enjoyment on those routes is that I am in those big environments, and that I, through technique and mind control and tactics, that I feel like I maintain a semi-reasonable margin of safety, and say pounding pitons for a belay, and I'm able to get a sort of safe belay in this on this shattered ledge, and I equalize a couple of pins before a dicey section because I know I won't be getting any gear for the next little bit. So again, kind of it's a really cool game to play. For some reason I have absolutely no interest in aid climbing, but I imagine it's maybe a bit of the same with hard aid, is that you play this game that's both physical and mental and technical to maintain control in this sort of environment where things could quite easily descend into chaos.
Sure. So I had this notion a minute ago when you were talking about how it's difficult to talk about why you're interested in it, and there's a vagueness in that. But then one of your criticisms of students in your physics classes is that they're not precise enough. Is there an idea that you've got these sort of yin-yang worlds that come together in climbing, where you've got this very precise world of physics, of science, and you've got this like place where you're desperately holding on to control? Your life is an interesting mix, I think, between that professorial life and then casting yourself out into these mountains. Seems like a pretty wild sort of mix, or maybe there is like a complete crossover for you and your brain for these two things.
I think one has to be careful drawing parallels because you can start just making shit up.
Hey, that's just the bread and butter of the Enormocast, making shit up. This is what we do.
All right, so
go for it. I've got like 22 hours on this data card here. We could just go.
But I think especially alpinism. I mean, obviously it's a physical game. You need to be fit and skilled. But especially alpinism, I think, is to a very large extent a mental game. And that the best alpinists out there are not necessarily the strongest ones around. And I think to that extent, there is the parallel to science, to physics, where it is a mental game. And maybe I'm a little too cerebral sometimes, but I do think through these things, and not always fully. I mean, sometimes I'll just look at a pitch and say, yeah, let's go for it.
Sure.
But certainly before a big route, I will think about the tactics and when should we get started, and what's our are the conditions good enough, and should we rappel down the route or should we descend a different way depending on those conditions? And so I think I am quite cerebral to some extent about my climbing, but I think there comes a point too where you cannot think your way through everything. You have to. There comes a point where you have to let go of that and just climb.
Right.
And ideally, you've climbed enough that you can draw on these resources, both of instinct and fitness and skill, and yeah, you just go for it.
That must be for you the breathtaking moments. I mean, I'm just trying to think about, you're suffering on these climbs. You were just talking about 24 hours. Most of it actually ends up being suffering, but there's a payoff that you keep coming back to, and could it be that that's the payoff, is when you reach those moments?
And I think you might have put your finger on something there, and it's I think one thing I'd like to get into more is or at all is meditation, just to kind of to try to achieve this sort of or to get better at achieving this kind of these moments of selflessness, where you transcend the self and you just are. And again, I certainly don't wish to sound spooky or spiritual in any way, because that's very much not me. But in climbing especially, I think one of the great appeals of climbing, and that can be dangerous alpine climbing, or it can also be, say, a hard red point or an onsite at your limit, where you just lose yourself in the climbing, that you no longer think about the clip you just skipped. You're just climbing. And I've definitely had those moments as well in the mountains on big routes. And I remember those moments. So, for example, on one of the biggest climbs I've done in my life, the northwest face of K6 West, on the crux, there are these sort of little unconsolidated icicles. I remember placing upside down screws and broken off daggers, and I kind of had to decide that either I was going to fully commit to the climbing, or I needed to come down. And basically I decided that, okay, I'm just going to commit to it. And I remember it was kind of flashed through my mind, pulling through a few of the moves, that, okay, this is 50-50. I'm going to pull on this dry tool placement, and it could skip off, and I could be out of there. But the thought just kind of flashed through my mind, and it was gone. And I was just climbing. And obviously you don't enter those sort of zones all that often, but they're pretty special when you do.
Yeah, who did you climb that with?
My friend Ian Wellstead, who has been my most regular partner in Pakistan.
And that you guys got recognition PLA for that? Is that
we got the PLA for that.
Yeah, so I read about that climb a bit, and I've always wondered, you've got this like crazy upside down dry tooling world that's basically, fun sport climbing out for the afternoon, and single pitch ice climbing and stuff, and then every once in a while people take this leap and take some of those extreme techniques that, if you go out at 9 a.m. and come home at 6 p.m, it's not that big a deal, but to apply them to these big peaks, I mean, is that what was going on that face, in a sense? Like you were really going for it in the same way that you, maybe not quite as steep, but but this is a big mountain. Usually people kind of take a step back from those wild extreme things. I mean, were you finding like that kind of climbing up there?
I mean, obviously it wasn't nearly that hard.
Sure.
But especially given that at that point we're well above 6,000 meters, so the air was getting kind of thin. Between that and the fact that it was overhanging mixed climbing, it felt pretty damn desperate.
That's
and
awesome.
the whole climb, had sections of vertical ice and thin vertical pitches. I don't think we would have gotten up that climb without our long apprenticeship in the Rockies.
Sure.
And for me especially, I don't think I would have gotten up those pitches without having put in the time at the crags. But at the same time, you cannot just stay at the crags because the crags can be kind of self-limiting because you just get too comfortable and reliant. You get too comfortable in that environment and too reliant on safety and always climbing a safe environment. And so actually quite early on, so sort of fairly shortly after that incident told you about when I kind of lost interest in dry tooling because with the heel spurs I could realize I could kind of heel hook my way up anything. I started taking that game into initially the bigger north faces in the Rockies in winter. And so a bit of a breakthrough there was when my friend Ben Firth and I climbed a particular route, the Greenwood Loch on the north face of Mount Temple in winter, and it was something that had been attempted in winter a bunch, and people try to rock climb it in gloves and aid climb, and it always took too long, and then the weather would crap out. And we went up there and we dry tooled our way up it, and it wasn't, in retrospect, it wasn't that hard, but again, it's not the kind of thing that I think we could have done had we not had that background of cave climbing, but also it's not the kind of thing we could have done had we not had the desire to venture outside of the crags. And I think that's where maybe not that many people make that leap, make the transition from the crag to sort of even the world of something like the Stanley Head Wall, these 4 or 5 pit routes, and beyond that, places like North Face of Temple or beyond that, places like these big peaks in Pakistan. And I'm not saying that's better or worse. It's, it's in the end, it's just climbing, and climbing is an absurd activity. It doesn't make the world a better place. We do it for ourselves. So there are no better or worse forms of climbing. It's just whatever we enjoy.
Did you feel cognizant of this point where, you said about 10 years ago or something, you started to do these expeditions. Were you pretty cognizant of that feeling of like, it's time for me to go a little bit further with this stuff, see what altitude's all about? Or was it just an opportunity that came on and you decided to go and enjoyed it?
I think a bit of both. So for a long time, I didn't want to go on expeditions because I figured that on expeditions, you don't do very much climbing, which is true. But I'm still not completely sure what changed my mind. Actually, I kind of do. So the first time I went to Pakistan was with Steve Swenson, and Steve sent out this email with an attachment showing this peak that looked like the north face of the Grand Juras, but transposed 2.5 kilometers higher. Right. And I looked at that and I thought, wow, that actually looks really cool. And so I sort of thought about it and talked about it with my wife, and then emailed Steve back. It's like, sure, okay, I'm interested. And I think there was maybe the element of, okay, I've done quite a bit of climbing in the Rockies. I've done some harder alpine climbing in the Rockies. Let's see what these bigger mountains are all about. Those peaks look beautiful. They look hard. Let's see what it feels like going there. And it was a pretty hard apprenticeship between third world travel, and so the whole business of staying healthy. The first few trips, that was actually one of the biggest challenges was actually being healthy for these big peaks. And then acclimatization. So I realized, for example, that even though by the time I first went to Pakistan, I'd already climbed peaks like Logan and Denali, kind of realized that with all due respect to North America, that North American mountains don't teach us about altitude. That yes, those peaks are tall and it gets a bit hard to breathe up there, but on both Logan and Denali, by the time you're getting up high, you're slogging, you're just walking. And chances are, if you're reasonably fit and fast, you don't even have to be spending much time up high. And so I thought I knew about altitude, and I really didn't, because it's a totally different game when you actually have to sleep up high and spend day after day up high and climb up high. And
how was the success on that first one?
So on the first one, we actually did not get the permit for this peak.
Oh, okay.
Actually, it's kind of funny that this summer I'm going back to Pakistan, hoping to go back for that very peak that first drew me to Pakistan. Pakistan has since opened up that area a little bit, and so it looks like there's a chance to try that particular peak. And so it's kind of funny that I'm going back to try the thing that first drew me there, that it was that photo that first got me excited about going to Pakistan.
Awesome.
So, fingers crossed, inshallah, the army doesn't change their mind and deny us the permit. But that first trip, we didn't get the permit for that particular peak. We didn't get the permit actually for another peak we applied for was K6. We didn't get the permit for that. And so in the end, we went for trekking peaks, which in Pakistan is anything under 6,500. So for example, the Trango Towers and Nameless are considered trekking peaks.
Oh, that's pretty funny.
It's kind of funny, but it's
just the way. A rough trek.
Yeah. But basically, in Pakistan, trekking doesn't mean easy. It means under 6,500. Okay. So we went to the Churkusa Valley, which is a gorgeous, gorgeous valley. It's this kind of high-altitude Chamonix in the eastern Karakoram, with anything from bouldering through one-pitch crack routes or one or multi-pitch crack routes, through rock spires, through super alpine objectives. And so we went there and we played on peaks under 6,500. And even there we failed. And to some extent, I think it was, I think it was misjudgment on a few occasions, and certainly my misjudgment. I would look at a peak and think, oh, that looks like a really cool line, not realizing that might be a cool line in the Rockies, but in Pakistan, we just won't be fast enough at that altitude to get through those pitches. So we actually didn't get up much of anything that trip, but somehow the seed was planted, the hook was set, and I fell in love with the mountains, and actually fell in love kind of with the country too, and the villagers up in those mountain villages can be pretty rough around the edges, but mostly they're incredibly warm and generous people, and so it was fun just to spend time with them as well, and to see the incredibly hard lives they live, and the fact they can kind of keep smiling through it all was quite humbling and quite inspiring as well.
How many times have you been back?
So I've been to Pakistan 4 times, and I've only made one trip to the Himalaya proper. It was kind of an ill-fated trip. We wanted to climb a new variation on Everest in alpine style, and we picked the year of the earthquake.
Oh, okay.
And so we went from the north side, so we had been in base camp for 2 or 3 weeks acclimatizing when the earthquake struck, and so that's the end of that.
Have you any desire to do that again?
I don't think I'm obsessed about Everest.
Right.
So in fact, the Everest thing here was very much a second thought. Originally, I just wanted to go to 8,000 meters and experience what that's like, and I didn't have too much interest in doing a normal route. So originally, I wanted to go to something like Shishapangma and climb one of those cool routes on the south face of Shishapangma. And somehow my partners were not interested in that. They really wanted to go to Everest. So I finally said, okay, let's go to Everest. I was actually quite scared about the trip because both my partners had been up high before. They had summited things like Lhotse in Makalu, so sort of in an 8,500 meter range. Whereas to this day, I have only ever been slightly above 7,000 meters. So I was, especially talking to people like Steve Swenson, who have summited Everest without oxygen, they told me how incredibly hard it is. Just that basically your body doesn't want to be up there, and it's letting you know in no uncertain terms.
Sure.
And your physiology can react in very strange and very wrong ways very quickly. And so I was, I have to admit, I was quite scared about how my body would react up high.
Well, you certainly also, aside from your own personal safety, I mean, as somebody who's alpine climbing in a small team, you don't want to be the guy that becomes the liability. Someone who's used to being so capable, there's probably just got to always be this seed am I going to be the guy that steps up that high and suddenly I'm the rescue case,
That's right. And realistically, you're the rescue case, but at that altitude, especially if you're just there with your two partners, it may be at the point where it's all that anyone can do to take care of themselves, much less take care of a sick partner. And so yeah, that was very much in the back of my mind, is that I'm going to a place where, again, we're talking about control and chaos. I'm going to a place where things will be very much beyond my control. Something like you can acclimatize really well, but something like cerebral edema comes on, again, it just comes on.
Right.
And comes, I've never had it, but I hear it comes on really fast. So
do you still have a desire to test yourself up there?
I think I do. So I think there's somehow, we talked about going up high for this trip, and in the end, for a number of reasons, we decided to kind of get more techie, and so play on peaks just under 7,000, sort of much more technical peaks where I think there's going to be some pretty hard climbing. But
I love the word you're using, to play on these peaks.
Well,
I mean, no, it's a great word, and I know it reflects your again, this joyful, this like, I love the mountains kind of thing. But it's just it's a cool word to hear someone say, oh yeah, it's 6,000 meters. We'll just go play on it.
Well, we refer to our style on these expeditions that people talk about. Siege style or expedition style or alpine style. We refer to our style as base camp style, that we maximize the amount of time spent in base camp. That we kind of do these sort of quick trips to acclimatize, come back to base camp, then kind of wait for the weather window, and then try to send whatever big thing we want to send and come back to base camp.
Right.
So in the end, we actually don't spend that much time above base camp.
Okay.
Because base camp is so comfortable,
right.
and Raphael, our longtime friend and cook, makes such amazing dinners.
Right. Yeah, it's hard to leave. What did you guys do? Oh, we just hung on base camp. Did you go climbing? No.
Well, but even actually, it was one of my fondest memories of that K6 trip is that after we were done with K6, we still had something like 10 days left in base camp, and I guess we could have left the mountains, but why leave the mountains? And the weather was actually good enough. We could have gone for another big objective. But at that point, it was mostly that I just didn't want to carry another heavy pack.
Sure.
And so for the remaining time, we're super well acclimatized by that point. So we just went and did these day trips on these 5,500 meter rock spires, sort of climbing up to 5,900, 5,10 on these granite spires. And every day would start with Rasul's breakfast, every day would end with Rasul's dinner. And during the day, we'd kind of summit these spires where on one of them, we actually had to take turns on the summit, like belay one another the summit, because it was so sharp. So
cool.
So just fantastic.
Yeah, that sounds more like my style.
You'd actually, I would, to whoever's listening, I would highly recommend the Chorkusa Valley for the perfect alpine holiday. The people are unbelievably friendly, and again, you can just have an amazing time playing on, again, bouldering in base camp, and then you go summit these rock spires in this grand environment with a backdrop of some 3,000 meter faces.
No, that sounds unreal. I kind of wanted to real quick go all the way back to the beginning. I know from my moments of research that you come from a little bit of a climbing background. Your father was a climber and was bringing you, and did you have brothers and sisters, or what was your scene? And going all the way back to Poland,
sure.
You actually were born and raised.
Sure. So I was born in Poland. I lived there until I was 12. In fact, both my parents were climbers. They in fact met through the climbing club, and my mother was actually one of the hottest, in many more ways than one, female climbers in her time. She was doing sort of first female ascents of some hard routes in the Tatras back in the mid to late 1950s. And then once my older brother was born in the early 60s, I think, as happens to a lot of people, climbing, especially back in those days when climbing was a lot more dangerous. I mean, climbing, both my parents started climbing before nylon ropes. So the idea of, for example, falling, like to this day, we go out cragging with my dad, and my dad just amazed that I'm so casual at falling. Right. He was raised in...
Those things are, I mean, they're in your genes and bones. You don't just give them up.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't you did not take falling on hemp ropes casually.
Right.
But yeah, so both my parents were climbers from their early 20s. My father was a climbing instructor for quite a while. And so when I was growing up, we traveled quite a bit. So we moved from Poland to North Africa, to France, to Canada. And so there wasn't much opportunity to climb. But in fact, when we emigrated to Canada, basically my parents could have, we had been living in Algeria, which is a Francophone country largely, and France. So it would have made a lot more sense to, say, emigrate to Montreal in Quebec. But in fact, they chose Calgary because it was closer to the mountains.
Oh, right on.
And so we moved
Your fate was set.
And my fate was set. So I moved to Calgary, and then basically my dad sort of wanted someone to go out with and scramble and do glacier crossings and whatnot, and that was the closest thing at hand. So basically, I started these adventures with my dad, and it didn't grab me initially.
So that I was kind of interested because it sounds like maybe you went along with them or whatever, but your personal climbing didn't start till quite a bit later.
Yeah, no, I much preferred hanging out with my girlmind than going climbing with my dad.
Teenagers. Yeah.
It was in fact moving to, like I said, like we talked about at the beginning of the show, that moving to Chicago and all of a sudden realizing that those mountain adventures, that I guess they meant more to me than I realized.
Sure, right.
And that I missed the mountains, and I'm going to look for the next best thing. Even if the next best thing is this 5-meter retaining wall with broken glass at its base.
Right. Excellent. Are your folks still around?
My dad is,
okay.
And my dad is 80, and earlier this season, we were, for his first day out of the season, we were out on vertical ice.
Oh, amazing.
No, he still climbs.
Awesome.
He is still fit. Just a few years ago, we tried Denali together. So, he is a lifer, and even if he doesn't climb as hard as he used to, and maybe slowing down a bit, being a climber is a huge part of his identity, and he's going to be a climber for the rest of his days.
And is that a role model to you in that sense? Is that your imagined future?
That kind of yes. I think it's kind of when she sees my dad, my wife gives up hope.
Right, exactly. This woman is amazing. She's also a little bit mythical from your friend's point of view.
I know. A friend, a mutual friend, Colin Powick, doesn't believe she exists.
So yeah, I have climbing friends like that. I'm just like, you're not married. All right, last question. What about these hairless cats?
Beauty's in the eye of the beholder. And we're talking about kids earlier, so I don't have kids, and partly there was it's kind of a horrible thing to say, but neither my wife nor I like kids that much. Sorry.
That's fine. No, I didn't either. Don't worry about it.
I guess you always like your own, right?
Yes.
But it was to some extent a selfish decision too, that I like my lifestyle. And I was afraid kids would cramp it. But I think
they do.
But I think both my wife and I have sort of taken our maternal paternal feelings and have sort of transferred them into the cats.
Okay.
So our hairless cats are incredibly spoiled. They have heated blankets, and of course this is Calgary, so
a hairless cat is a little out of place in Calgary in the winter.
A hairless cat is out of place pretty much anywhere in the wild, because they sunburn in the summer.
Okay.
So we put little coats on them in the summer so they don't sunburn.
Awesome. Well, cool, Raph. Thanks for sitting down. I'm so stoked that we made this happen here. We're actually at the Ouray Ice Festival, and this got set up hours ago to do this interview, and it was fascinating, and I can't wait for people to hear it. So I appreciate you sitting down.
Yeah, and I've been a fan of your show for a while, so it's an honor and a pleasure to be on it, and yeah, I'm really glad we made this happen. And do come back to the Rockies, and I'd love to have you show me around the Ghost.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I've got a route up there that never got done. I've been trying to sell it to some Canadians.
Is it in the North Coast?
Yeah, it's in the North Coast.
It's kind of beyond the Alberta Jam there.
On the other side.
Oh, it's not on the same side as Alberta Jam.
No,
it's on the same side as Sunset Boulevard.
Yeah. So we've said enough. We have to go, but I'll tell you about it in just a second. All right, folks, thanks for listening, and thanks to Rapheal Slawinski for sitting down. That turned out to be one of my recent favorites, actually. Kind of was this onion that we were peeling away, trying to get at something important in the middle there, and I think we did. I think even Raphael was surprised. Anyhow, remember, folks, if you dig what's going on over here at the Enormocast, even if you feel occasionally insulted, you can support the podcast by going to enormocast.com, clicking on the Help Out tab, and if you feel like it, you can kick down a little money. Since you're probably out of guilt, sold that Sprinter van off, and are sitting on a good pile there. So throw a little bit our way. That would be awesome. The Royal We always appreciates it. Okay, everybody, stay safe out there. Remember, no matter how you're clipping in, how you're getting down, whatever you're up to, don't fuck yourself up. Come home in one piece, because when you come home in many pieces or in a box, it breaks everybody's heart. So don't break any hearts that way. And remember, tragedy stalks relentlessly. So pay attention and check your knot.
Gentlemen, welcome to my underground lair. It's been 30 years, but I'm back. Everything's gone perfectly to plan except for one small flaw. Due to a technical error by my henchman Mustafa, complications arose in the unfreezing process.
My design was perfect.
Look what you did to Mr. Bigglesworth!
But Dr. Evil, we were unable to anticipate feline complications due to the reanimation process.
Silence!